India was quite different than Canada. I noticed a lot of differences, but for the purpose of today's video, I'm going to share with you the top 8 weird and wacky differences between India and Canada. I don't usually notice electricity, I just take it for granted, but I could not help noticing electrical switches in India.
What does what? Look at all these light switches. This is just for the bathroom. So, who knows what does what? You constantly have to try a million just to see what's what. Oh, that was the fan.
In Canada, light switches are pretty straightforward. There's a switch, you flick it, the light goes on. In India, you have a lot more options as to which specific light you want to turn on. I'm sure eventually I would get the hang of it. Plugins are also very different in India. With a proper converter though, this difference is no big deal. I unfortunately did not have a good one, so it was a challenge. Oh, another interesting fact, power poles in India are made of cement instead of wood. Again, I don't normally notice things like breaker panels, but I did see a big difference between the Indian ones and the Canadian ones. In Canada, a plug-in anywhere near water needs a GFCI for safety reasons. In India, it seemed okay to have a plug-in in the shower, no safety measures necessary. Oh, and this kind of setup to directly connect a blow dryer would never be approved in Canada. This is what we're used to in Canada. Wide roads with little to moderate traffic. Unless, of course, you're in a big city at rush hour. Then it would look a little bit more like this. This is what India traffic looks like. There is definitely more traffic, more people. However, slower traffic, and it's a better flow. There's hardly any stop signs or lights, just speed bumps to slow down the traffic, and roundabouts in large cities. At first, it does look like chaos, especially in narrow streets and with all the cows, dogs, goats, tuk-tuks, scooters occupying the roads. But then I realized that the traffic hardly ever stopped. It flowed very well, even in construction zones. You can't say that in Canada. At first, all the honking seemed impolite, but I soon realized that there is a whole language within the beeps. It was actually impolite not to beep in many cases. We take the peace and quiet for granted here in Northern Ontario. In India, it's a non-stop cacophony of noises. Between the honking, the barking dogs, all the weddings, the fireworks, it's very loud. I actually had to sleep with earplugs for most of the nights. For some reason, the doors in India really impressed me. Maybe because they're stunning. Each so different, elegant, almost like works of art, really. Motel room locks were quite different, almost like going back in time 50 to 100 years. Very unique though, I have to say. In Canada, our doors are weather tight, because they have to be. This kind of door would bring in swarms of mosquitoes or piles of snow in Canada. This is a big difference between the two countries due to sanitation standards and customs. In Canada, you have a toilet bowl, a seat at a comfortable height, then toilet paper within reach to wipe yourself with. We take this for granted, but it's not like this everywhere. A lot of the hotels and resorts that cater to foreigners have American-style toilets, but in people's homes and in public facilities, on the road, in truck stops, squat toilets are the norm. And after a while, they're actually preferable because they're cleaner. This kind of setup was the worst. They look like American toilets, but they don't flush. There's no seat, and you're expected to squat on top. Wiping is a whole nother story. Here in Canada, you do your business, then you wipe yourself with toilet paper, end of story. In India, it's standard practice to use a spray hose to rinse off, or to take water and with your left hand wipe yourself. I won't go into more details, but they feel it's actually cleaner than paper. Of course, the bathrooms are always wet. Two more interesting bathroom facts. Toilet paper rolls in India, when you're lucky enough to get them, are half the size of ours, but the cardboard roll, 10 times thicker. And the other thing is that they put mothballs in most of the sinks everywhere to prevent bugs from coming up the pipes, I guess. Seeing all the street animals was one of my biggest thrills on this trip. I never got tired of all the cows, goats, sheep, donkeys everywhere. Compared to Canada, where our street animals, mostly dogs, suffer greatly with the lack of food, the cold, and ultimately, the end does not fare well for them. Many revert to wild and start attacking humans, then have to be killed, especially on remote communities. In India, everyone takes care of the animals. Of course, there are exceptions that end in tragedy, but mostly, the animals are the responsibility of the community. The first portion of every meal goes to the cows, and the last portion goes to the dogs. As a result, the animals are all sociable and just part of life in India. I actually really miss seeing them everywhere. In Canada, we are used to strict safety standards, sometimes a little over the top, bordering on ridiculous, but basically, anyone working in an industrial, commercial, or construction site needs to wear at minimum a reflective jacket or shirt, safety boots, and usually a hard hat. It was strange for us to see workers in factories walking around in flip-flops to do their jobs. There didn't seem to be any safety regulations in place, like masks being provided for fine particles of cotton floating everywhere in the air that could damage their workers' lungs. I'm definitely not an expert on Indian safety laws, but it just seemed strange to us Canadians.